We are joined by our guest, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, and we are about to get into the subject of cosmic wars. Before we, this would have to do with it, sort of. I'm kind of wondering about this. Richard Hoagland, I've heard him talk about it on Coast to Coast before. He says you can take a pair of night vision goggles and look up to the sky, and you can actually see, I don't know, like spacecraft or whatever flying around at night. I'm curious if you've ever tried that, or if you think there's any truth to that.
Well, I haven't tried it. I can't afford night vision goggles.
Same here.
One doesn't get rich in this business, as you probably know.
Right.
I know several people that have done that and have seen some rather astonishing things. So I don't doubt that people are seeing all sorts of stuff going on out there. I've seen some intriguing videos from some of this stuff. So no, I don't have any problem with people that have looked up there and seen something. It's just I haven't.
Have you ever seen UFOs? I have.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to make you more comfortable. Yeah.
My first answer is always when people ask me, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" And my answer is yes. Every time there's a full moon, and I'm not joking. The moon, if you stop and consider the physics of what it's doing, is doing a rather astonishing thing. If it was captured, as some scientists believe it was, then its orbit, if it enters the gravity well of the Earth, then it's going to speed up as it gets closer to Earth. And then as it flies by, it's going to start to slow down. So the orbit of an object captured like that should be much more elliptical than it is. So in other words, if it was a captured object with a circular orbit, a nearly circular orbit around the Earth, which in addition to that, it revolves on its own axis, but revolves in such a period that we never see more than 60% of the surface of the moon, and it's always the same surface. So, figuring out the orbital mechanics of all of that simply by capture, that's piling up a lot of coincidences. So in other words, the real bottom line is that for the moon, if it's a captured object to be in that kind of orbit, then someone slowed it down and parked it there.
Right, I've heard this before.
I'm not the first to say this. Isaac Newton, his complaint was that the moon is the only thing that gave him a headache. Isaac Asimov pointed out Russian scientists back in the Soviet era in the 1960s just came right out and hypothesized in some of their scientific magazines that it was a big artificial object, or at least had been steered there. So that's my first answer. But yes, I've also seen a more conventional UFO thing a couple of years ago.
Okay. So, think there's any link to these beings as far as giants goes?
I don't know. I really don't know. What I saw, I'm kind of hard-headed about this. With one or two exceptions, I can't think of any UFO case that absolutely compels me to conclude that it must necessarily be an extraterrestrial technology. What I saw was certainly interesting. It was certainly technologically sophisticated, but the signature I saw was not a signature sufficient to suggest to me that this thing is coming here from Alpha Centauri.
Right.
In other words, at best, all I can say is that's an advanced technology. Whose it is, I don't know. It could be human, could be somebody else's. I simply don't know.
I agree. Same boat there, yeah.
Can you go into what you saw?
I did in a book called Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations.
Okay.
Basically, I was walking late at night. I'm a night owl, guys. So I was, I'm usually up until 5 or 6 in the morning, and I was living in Spearfish, South Dakota at the time, which is right on the northern tip of the Black Hills, kind of about 15 miles from the Wyoming border. And to the west of Spearfish, there's this big, tall, 6,000 feet tall mountain on the South Dakota side called Crow's Peak. And about 2:30 in the morning, I walked down to our little local 24-hour convenience store to get a Coke and walk down there, and on my way back I'm kind of walking up the hill, and I see the silhouette of the mountains off in the distance, real dark. And then I saw this strobing thing that would have been, from where I stood, would have been about 1/4 of an inch in length and about 3/16 of an inch wide, strobing real fast, kind of a wedge shape, arrow-shaped thing, strobing back and forth. And it zipped across the sky behind Crow's Peak. And I walked a few more paces, and I suddenly thought, oh my word, I've just seen a UFO. Because it was clearly not a meteor with the strobing effect.
Right.
And I stood still for a few minutes just to see if perchance I heard, any helicopter noises. Ellsworth Air Force Base isn't too far away, and oftentimes there's military helicopters that have those strobing lights. Didn't hear any helicopter sound. I was listening for jets. It made absolutely no sound. Mm-hmm. And given kind of the layout, it was just, to my mind, going far too fast for any conventional jet aircraft, not to mention a helicopter. So it was something, it was clearly a technology of some sort. But again, what I couldn't possibly say.
Interesting.
Well, that's awesome. Were you a little creeped out when you saw it?
No, not at all. Not at all. I was more creeped out by the fact that it took a few seconds to register that I had seen this thing. I was more creeped out by that, and when I just kind of stood there looking and listening for sounds, the thing that first occurred to me, well, that's advanced technology of some sort. But again, and my inclination would be to guess first that it was some sort of human advanced technology rather than anybody else's. While it was moving fast, again, it would not have been fast enough for any sort of interstellar travel or interplanetary travel. But it was definitely something.
I've seen quite a few strange-looking objects myself.
Me too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and it is rather arresting when you see something like that. That was really my first and only UFO sighting in a conventional sense.
It was actually the main reason why I got into video editing, because I wanted to recreate it just because I thought that'd be cool.
Yeah, I went home and to this day I could kick myself that I didn't write down the date and time more accurately. All I did was I sketched it real fast in one of my notebooks, and in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations I reproduced the little sketch I drew of this weird looking little thing, whatever it was.
Okay. So another topic. Let's see. My aunt, who's awesome, she might be listening to right now. She brought up to me, I think it was in 1996. She told me that in 1997 there would be. She described it as wars in the heaven between different alien races, and they would be fighting for Earth. And I have to ask, is that what you were referring to when you say cosmic wars?
No, the book Cosmic War is about an ancient cosmic war that I think was fought circa 3.2 million years ago for reasons that I get into in the book. Largely because that appears to be the most recent date that comes the closest in terms of astrophysical and geological evidence to the textual dates that are indicated by, the Manetho texts in Egypt, or the Edfu texts, or the Sumerian Kings List. And I grant that that's still a huge, whopping chronological discrepancy. I don't really attempt to resolve the chronological issue. I'm simply trying to look at the conceptual associations between the texts and what may have gone on. But that said, my approach to that war then, it's still my approach today, is that if you look at what the texts describe, it is describing an interplanetary conflict that's fought with some horribly destructive weapons, both biological and environmental, and press a button and blow up a planet sort of thing. And the thing that occurs in the text is that these wars are being fought by the gods, which, if you look at so to speak, their family tree, they're all ultimately related to each other. So my model has always been World War I. You've got the Kaiser as the grandson of Queen Victoria, the cousin of Tsar Nicholas II, related through other relations to Victor Emmanuel in Italy and Kaiser Franz Joseph in Austria. All of these royal families were intermarried over the decades for so long that, it was one big family fight.
Right.
And at the end of World War I, something very peculiar happens. You had the Allies inventorying German technology, and in the Treaty of Versailles stipulating, we don't want you building any more great big huge siege guns, no more heavy artillery, please no more airplanes, and keep your army really small. to make sure you're going to do this.
Right.
We want you to demilitarize the Rhineland. You can't station any troops west of the Rhine River, and we're extending that quarantine zone 30 miles on the east bank of the Rhine River. So if you look at the ancient texts, they suggest a very similar thing, that some sort of quarantine zone exists around planet Earth. In the book of Enoch, it's I believe it's at the orbit of the moon.
Yep.
In Henry Cornelius Agrippa, it's at the outermost orbit of the outermost planet, which back then would have been Neptune. So in other words, there's this idea that there's a quarantine zone around the Earth, but those texts don't tell you why. Well, if you connect the idea to this ancient cosmic war, what you have is an interplanetary Treaty of Versailles. We're going to keep these little monkeys cordoned off down here on this little planet, and
right.
Step over this line, and you're in trouble. So I think there's some sort of ongoing effect of that war, and here's why. If you use my World War I analogy again, the Allies, the French in particular, had their military attachés during the interwar period, constantly scouring Germany, inspecting their industrial plants and so on to make good and sure, that the Germans weren't building any more big artillery. And in other words, they performed an intelligence mission. So if we have that idea in mind for the cosmic war, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to leave people behind. You're going to have intelligence agents keeping an eye on what the monkeys are up to on planet Earth,
True.
And
Yeah.
they're going to watch very closely. And to me, that fits very neatly with the whole lore surrounding the idea of the Watchers.
Well said. I've heard this before. I heard that they're kind of trapped here, kind of like you got to live with your creation and deal with it type deal.
Well, that may be, but that may be the cover story for a much more covert intelligence purpose. I tend to look at things. With kind of a jaundiced, cynical intelligence military eye when I read when I read these texts.
Essentially, there's a connection between these cosmic or interplanetary wars and wars going on today here on Earth.
There could be, yes. I think to put it rather differently, I don't think you can understand the current financial system without the UFO. And once you've said that, then, as I put it in the Secret Space Conference that we had this last June, If you're the American national security establishment after World War II, you're dealing with a threefold strategic threat. You're dealing with the communist bloc. You are dealing with some sort of post-war independent Nazi group that's still doing its secret research, and then you're dealing with the UFO. So what do? Well, the first thing that's going to occur to you is you're going to have to develop technologies that can do triple duty and keep an eye on all three things and try and figure out through reconnaissance what they're up to. So that's the first thing. The other thing that you're going to be thinking is well, humanity is at the Tower of Babel moment again. We've reached a certain pitch of technological development that's obviously of concern to whoever's behind these things, since they show such an inordinate interest in our nuclear and thermonuclear capability, which means that in turn that those technologies are a gateway technology to far greater capabilities, so we'd better figure out what that is and why they're so interested in it. So we're in the Tower of Babel moment again. So they're going to figure out a long-term strategy of how to get through the Tower of Babel moment without some sort of intervention again. And that's going to require, in my thinking, that they establish a long-term Black Projects research program to emulate the technological performance of UFOs and demonstrate parity or near parity with it. And that's going to require just a basket load of cash. And, you can't come out and tell people, well, we're going to tax you to death for the next 60 years because we've got a UFO problem and we're going to try and figure out how to build the technology to face it off. You can't do that. So you're going to put into place a huge hidden financial system to fund this thing. And yeah, that's basically my take on it.
Now, could there be... there are probably, if there are aliens out there, and if it's not just technology that our government has, then there could be more than one species, and some of those species might be on our side and trying to free humanity. Now,
could be, yeah.
Yeah.
The problem here is that if you're that national security establishment, you're going to start reading these ancient texts in much the same way that I've read them, and I hate to part company with the jonquils and daisies crowd in the New Age ufology movement, but those texts would indicate to anybody that's willing to read them that whoever that group of people is, most of the time they didn't have humanity's best interest at heart. So, I think that would have been primary and uppermost in their concerns.
Okay. All right. So, wow. Where do you think this is going to go? Do you think they'll eventually tell the public, or do you think they'll just try to keep it hidden secret as they've been doing?
Well, let's put it this way, if there is any sort of extraterrestrial presence or interdimensional beings, what have you, at some point, the technology itself is going to drive some sort of contact, whether it is hostile or friendly. It's going to drive some sort of contact. I do think, for reasons that we don't have time to get into, that there are a lot of signals going on right now in the public literature that indicates they're letting out a whole lot of very, very strange technology. So in other words, I think the elite is showing signs that they know that they are in this period of transition, and they're going to try and guide it and steer it as carefully as they can over the next 50 to 100 years. I talked a lot about that whole idea again at that San Mateo conference last June. And I talk about it. I talk about it in my books, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops, and Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations. Those 3 books, I talk about all these various ideas in some detail.
Okay. A little off topic here. What do you think about the whole Ebola thing? Do you think it's a threat? Do you think they're using it as a biowarfare to cull the population, or is it just another bird flu scare, E. coli?
I think it's a bit of all 3. I think a lot of it's hype and hysteria, and theater is being deliberately driven. I do think it's a legitimate threat. I do think that there's every indication that it is biowarfare. The question really remains is if it's biowarfare intended to cull the population, which population is it intended to cull?
Yeah.
Most people are unaware that Caucasians have a particular leukocyte in their blood that makes them much less susceptible to Ebola and much more capable of fighting it off than black people, where the population, you see, it already gets very, very complicated. I have some blogs up already on my website in the last couple of weeks about this, and I've got a few more blogs coming up about it because, once again, believe it or not, there is a German connection. So take that for whatever it's worth, and watch for the blogs about it. And I talked about it on a recent video news and views I did on October 18th, and I'll be blogging more about it in the next couple of weeks.
Nice. Okay. All right. Chris, you have...
I'll check that out. I didn't know anything about that.
I know Chris has a couple good questions.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I do too, but I want to give him a chance.
Yeah, hold on a second. I had some listener questions, actually.
Uh-huh.
Nice. Get to them. I had them up here. All right. I promised I would ask these. One of the listeners wants to know something about the moon, about if you think that it's artificial.
Well, we already talked about that. The Soviets came out, I think it was circa 1968 or 67, somewhere in that time frame, in a little English language magazine that the Soviet Union used to publish called Sputnik. It was kind of a Soviet version of popular science. And they had 2 Russian astrophysicists proposing that the moon was in actual fact an artificial body of some sort, principally because of some of the physics problems that I outlined earlier. And that was picked up and popularized in this country in a book called Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon by Don Wilson. I have that book. It was a little paperback book that was published after the Soviet articles, and he references these Soviet articles, and basically he points this out. The bottom line for me is it may or may not be an artificial object, but if it isn't, it was at least, it appears that if you accept the capture model, then it would have had to have been basically steered and parked.
Right.
Where it is.
Right. I've heard this before.
Yeah. There are other little indicators about it in ancient lore. There's a group in Greece, ancient Greece, that had the lore that there was once a time when there was no moon in the sky. You have another Hindu bit of legend that says something to the effect that the old moon broke. So, there's all these very strange little tidbits of things out there in ancient human lore that indicate something very weird is going on with the moon. So, I don't have any difficulty believing that there was a technology that may have been in play to get it there and doing what it's doing.
So where would that leave us on the moon landings?
Well, again, if you go back to the idea that there's a quarantine zone at the orbit of the moon, if you go to the idea that somebody parked it there, it could very easily be, as some suspect, that we may have been warned off from going back. I personally think that that's a bit wobbly. There's another school of thought out there that says that we did go back, but we went back secretly. So, it is strange to me that now you have this mad scramble of everybody on Earth who has a space program also saying that we want to go to the moon and do some snooping around. The Russians have announced that they want to put a manned expedition to the moon no later than 2030. The Indians want to. The Europeans, of course, are on board with all of this and much more. So, and of course the Chinese have just sent a probe to the moon and are being rather cagey about what they're finding out there.
Of course.
And the Japanese, by the same token, a few years ago had a huge lunar probe that they sent to the moon that they released a couple of extremely interesting pictures and then just shut up about it. So it looks to me like everybody wants to get to the moon to check out NASA's story.
There's a lot of interesting stories I've heard about the moon, such as before the moon was there, before they parked it there, women were only able to ovulate once a year, so they would instead of once a month.
Well, I don't know. I've not heard.
Exactly.
I'm going to keep my comments.
Imagine that. We may just have world peace. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. Oh boy. I'm just kidding. I'm not a misogynist.
Here comes the hate mail, Jeff.
I am not a misogynist. I love women. I am completely fine with the whole emotions thing. Fine. I don't think I can dig myself out of that one.
No, I'd stop now.
Sorry. I do. I like it. Whatever.
I do have a quick question. Now, a lot of the what we call them the mainstreamers, the mainstream scientists and archaeologists, seems that some are now kind of willing to take on more alternative ideas. Are you finding that they're more willing to listen to your ideas, or the conclusions that you come to now, or?
Well, as far as I know, most of them don't even know I exist, and I'd prefer to keep it that way.
Keep it that way. Yeah.
I really don't have time even to debate people much. I'm simply trying to put out as much argued speculation as I can, in the hopes that people will at least question some of these paradigms. I'm the first to admit that my speculations may be wildly wrong. But I really haven't found anybody that's engaged directly with me in that fashion. There are a few little indicators here and there that some in the mainstream might be willing to rethink things.
Right.
But again, it's not necessarily in response to alternative research or anything like that. It's just that some of their models are breaking down under their own dead weight. What that will lead to, time will tell. But I really haven't encountered that.
Okay. Have you heard of the soul trapper theory? How they have a soul trapping device on the moon, and when we die, you go into the light and it captures your soul and forces you to be. It wipes your memory clean and forces you back into a life.
I've heard theories like that. Again, I tend to avoid those types of theories because there's really not much argumentation behind them.
Right.
I may or may not eventually deal with issues like that in some of my planned books. Lord willing, I'll get around to writing them. But I have my own ideas on the whole topic, but I don't really want to talk about them until I have more detailed research under my belt. That
Understandable.
Anything I would say would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're probably never going to get more information on that topic, because that'd be like impossible. I mean, the only way we would ever know is if we actually die and do that, and I'm not looking forward to that. So.
Well, neither am I.
Exactly. So that's never gonna. That's just gonna have to be an unsolved mystery right there.
Well, I don't think it'll necessarily be unsolved. I think one can make certain significant stabs. And like I say, I have a few hypotheses, but I don't want to try and talk about them until I have a book to put in people's hands so that they can look at the details of what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it, until I can actually do that.
Good call. Good call. So what do you think blew up this planet? That because the only theory I've heard so far is that that whole Nibiru thing came into contact with the planet, and that's how we have the asteroid belt now.
No, I'm not a catastrophist.
Okay.
I deal with all of that in my book, The Cosmic War. I simply don't see the physics for it.
Okay.
Dr. Van Flandern, in his book, Dark Matter, Missing Planets and New Comets, where he outlines his exploded planet hypothesis, and it's really not his hypothesis. It was the hypothesis of late 18th and early 19th century astronomers. He simply revived it. If you read his book, and I review his book in the Cosmic War in the very first chapter, he has three basic theses. And the first one he proposes is that it may have been some sort of natural fission reactor that went supercritical and blew the planet up. Well, natural fission reactors actually do occur. They occur right here on planet Earth. There's places in Africa where you have little piles of uranium that are little natural nuclear reactors. There have been similar reports. I haven't really been able to verify some of them in North America, but they do occur. The problem is that, as far as I know, the physics of fission reactions, they wouldn't have near the energy to blow up a planet like that, to go critical and blow up a planet like that. You'd have to have an extraordinarily large anomalous reactor to do that. And so Van Flandern himself kind of passes quickly by that hypothesis, and then he comes up with a hypothesis that, well, maybe there was a bunch of antimatter and matter that were held in separate containment at the core of the planet, and then somehow the containment broke down and the planet blew up. Well, again, that makes a lot of assumptions. The first being that the antimatter-matter relationship in the universe is isotropic, and it really isn't. If you stop and look at the data, there appears to be far less antimatter in the universe than matter, for good reason, because obviously when antimatter and matter get together, they mutually annihilate. So he quickly discards that idea. So then he says, as a final kind of thing that he tosses out there, and you can tell that he's not too happy with any of his naturally occurring models, and he's equally uncomfortable with the final model that he proposes. And the final model is, he said, well, what if it was some sort of experiment that went horribly wrong? In other words, what he's implying is a technology, and a technology that's capable of operating at a level of a planetary system. And of course, once he implies that, he kind of tiptoes and dances around the idea that it might have even been in a deliberate act. And those are his words. He doesn't use the word war but he uses the word deliberate act, and the implication is clear that one of the hypotheses that he's willing to entertain is precisely a technology of warfare capable of doing that. So, that's where I begin the book, is do we have an indication in ancient texts that there might have been a technology like that available? Well, the answer is absolutely, definitely yes. There's no two ways about it. And as to what the technology may be, I'll put it this way. If you've got a technology that enables you to manipulate the fabric of space-time locally on the laboratory bench, so to speak, then you have potentially, theoretically, you have the technological capability to make a hydrogen bomb look like a firecracker.
What was the name of that device they had up in Europe? That was it not hydrogen, the halogen, the collider? I can't remember right off.
Oh, the large hadron collider at CERN you're talking about, yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Were you at all worried when they were testing that and playing around with that? Do you think it's safe for them? Okay.
I wasn't worried, but that is actually a matter that I was referring to earlier when I said some scientists are finding things that they're willing to begin questioning their models. I was thinking specifically of a certain group within modern theoretical and particle physics that as a result of them not finding what they were expecting to find when they turned that thing on, that they are now talking about getting rid in their equations, and this just made me drop my jaw, literally, of getting rid of all idea of dimensionality in their equations. And I thought, my God, has it come to that? Because, you look at general relativity is in 4 dimensions. You look at string theory, it's in 13 or 26 dimensions, depending on the rotation group of the theory. Modern physics, since Maxwell, has relied on a form of mathematical analysis in its equations called dimensional analysis. In other words, all equations of theoretical physics are geometrized and therefore dimensional equations. So that just left me stunned, because I've been kind of suggesting a similar sort of thing in my books all the way back to the Giza Death Star deployed. And my real suspicion is, I'll be very honest with you here, guys, and again, I have not a shred of evidence for this, it's just merely a gut intuition, is that when they first turned that thing on and then quickly turned it off and told the world, well, the reason we had to turn it off was because a tear occurred in the cooling mechanism around one of the big rings of magnets in the collider. And they gave us all sorts of explanations, and I don't think that was it at all. I think perhaps that when they turned it on for the first time and powered it up to about half of its power output, that they encountered a phenomenon that did not fit any of their standard models. Okay? The fact that they have obfuscated the Higgs so badly. First they claimed to have found it, then, oh no, they didn't find it. So if you read the literature, it's very confusing. Did they or didn't they find it? And now you have physicists saying, well, we haven't found about 30 other particles that we should have found by now. And it's that group of physicists that are suggesting, well, we need to rethink everything. We need to look at what our equations are going to look at without dimensionality. So in other words, they found something that's suggesting to them that they need a radically different way of mathematically modeling what they've been talking about for the last 150 years, which is breathtaking. And the other thing that confirms my suspicion here is that China, in I think the last couple of months, announced that they want to build their own Large Hadron Collider, even bigger than the one at CERN. Crazy. So what that's telling me is the Chinese are not satisfied with the information coming out of CERN, and they want to have a look-see for themselves.
Right. All that, right.
So, it's, wow.
That is something else.
I strongly suspect that we're going to see in the next 100 years, we're going to see the equations of physics moving out of tensor calculus and Lie algebras and so on. I think we're going to see much more use of set theory, combinatorics, and topologies than we are now. They're in heavy use already, but I think we're going to see that dramatically expand.
Wow. So it's going to be an interesting 100 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It will be.
Well, yeah. So what do you think about the singularity? I mean, that's supposed to hit us.
You mean the transhumanism singularity?
No, in general, just technology hitting its peak and then being able to build better machines on it, like robots that are smarter than us, building better robots, and then taking us God knows where.
I think there's a real danger of it.
Yeah.
I really do. I think there's danger of a whole lot of things. I have a blog coming up about a recent statement that Elon Musk made at, I think it was MIT, during a recent interview in the last couple of days, where he was asked a question about what he thought about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And he was just very blunt. He came out and said, well, I think with artificial intelligence we could be summoning the genie or the demon, I forget which it was, out of the box.
Yeah.
I have a blog coming up about that because I think he's, in spite of the fact that they kind of all laughed at him and mocked him, I think what he's really talking about is that peculiar interface between mind and consciousness and the physical world. I'm not a materialist. I don't believe that everything is explainable solely on material causes. In fact, I'm much more on the spiritual side of things. But I do believe that there's a complex mechanism of feedback loops between the two that we don't really understand, and that our dualistic philosophical systems have been wholly inadequate to explore. And I think that he's onto something there. My personal view for a long time has been that I think our individual consciousness or personality is not really something that's located within and because of our bodies. I think it's a non-local phenomenon. In other words, I think that we kind of transduce it into this world, but that doesn't mean it ceases existing when our bodies fall apart and we die. So I think when you put it that way, then yeah, if you've got a complex network of parallel processing and a huge network of parallel processing, you're creating the equivalent of a neural net that could transduce something into this world. And so yeah, I think the dangers are palpable.
You see, I think with the whole singularity thing, if the powers that control this planet now are in charge, are still in charge when that happens, we're in a lot of trouble. But I think if there's a serious revolution that this world has never seen, and power changes hands and the good guys take control, then this could really be a good thing to our advantage.
Well, maybe that's assuming that the powers that be now are evil and wicked. They're certainly showing all the displays of narcissism and psychopathy, but I'm hesitant to describe all of them as evil. They may know things that we don't know that may explain their strange behavior and motivations. One thing I do think that it appears to me is that they are showing signs of, if not panic, then extreme anxiety. They're acting like people. They're acting like people in a really big hurry for some reason.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're also acting like people that are deliberately and carefully tearing down an old cosmology and financial system that goes with it, and are slowly and deliberately introducing into the public consciousness the new memes. I'm particularly interested in the fact that there's been all these stories about fusion lately. I'm interested in the fact that there's been all of these stories about asteroid mining. NASA and DARPA with their 100-year goal project to make the United States warp capable in 100 years. They've come right out and said that, So, it looks to me like they're deliberately driving certain things into the public consciousness because they're preparing people.
Good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't even say the next 100 years will be interesting. It's more like every year.
Well, yeah, every year. But in 100 years, we're in a transition period that human society seems to go through about once every 500 years. But we're in a period, and I've said this many times, we're in one of those 500-year cycles right now. But this one is quantitatively and qualitatively different than any previous one in human history. There's really no precedent for this unless, once again, you go all the way back to some of those very, very ancient stories. And I really do adhere to my idea that we've been in this Tower of Babel moment of history really since about the middle of the Second World War on.
I would have thought that the Internet is what would put us in that Tower of Babel scenario. I mean, because the communications are just extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
The way information gets around now.
Ask yourself what the origins of that capability were. Well, it's communications redundancy, and it's a communications network that doesn't have any centers. So in other words, the internet was developed as a military capability by ARPA, ARPANET, and then out of that you had the World Wide Web, and now you have the internet. So in other words, we're using a military technology that was developed during the Cold War for very specific strategic reasons that you could not take out a communications infrastructure with a sudden first nuclear strike. Well, by the same token, if you're looking at it from the point of view of the post-war national security establishment with their threefold strategic problem of communists, Nazis, and UFOs, then there may be another reason besides the Soviet bloc that this communications network was put up. Same thing with 3D printing. I look at it from, again, a purely kind of intelligence military point of view. Why would you need a dispersed precision manufacturing and prototyping capability like that? Well, I'm thinking of the situation that Nazi Germany was in circa 1943. The Allies are bombing the daylights out of it. So what does the armaments minister Albert Speer do? He diversifies and distributes German heavy industry to much smaller plants all over the country, many of them underground, and then they go to modular production. So in other words, you had U-boats, they're big Type 21 U-boats that they began producing at the end of the war, were being built in these underground factories in sections. The sections were shipped to ports where they were welded together, and poof, you've got a U-boat, They were doing all sorts of that stuff, so that at the height of the Allied bombing campaign in 1944, August of 1944, that's also when Germany's industrial wartime production peaked. So, in spite of the fact that we're bombing the daylights out of them, they're producing tens of thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of tanks and so on. Their problem was they didn't have enough people to pilot and drive them, So I look at 3D printing the same way. Why do you need dispersed manufacturing all of a sudden? Well, there's a military purpose involved.
I have a theory that some good aliens snuck that technology as far as the internet goes, knowing that we would one day use it to basically to break ourselves free, and
well, maybe, I don't know, but I have to be honest here and say that I'm extremely skeptical of always trying to attribute every bit of human technological progress to aliens seeding or humans reverse engineering something alien.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you have to go there. I think you can explain most of these developments in terms of human research papers or engineering papers and so on. I get this all the time with the Nazi bell. Well, couldn't the Nazis have found and reverse engineered a crashed UFO? Well, sure they could, but there's really no good provenance to connect that idea with the Nazi bell. The provenance of papers is Gabriel Krohn's paper in 1935, the various unified field theories that were being published in Germany during the interwar period, the work of Dr. Walter Gerlach and Hans Thierring and people like that. So, the concepts behind the bell and some of the other exotic projects in this country that were going on, T. Townsend Brown and so on, the concepts are there in the human record. You don't always need to go to E.T. to explain all this stuff.
Okay. I'd like to think that. I hope that's the case. So.
Well, I would too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're in deep trouble.
Right.
But the other problem is I hear the ET seeding crash reverse engineering thing so many times, and I joked about it in my book Roswell and the Reich, that if ET keeps crashing things on planet Earth for us to reverse engineer, pretty soon we're going to have to start crashing stuff on ET's world so that they can catch back up with us. It's really an explanation that doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah, I think people don't give humans enough credit.
Yeah, they don't.
I think humans are generally good, and it's really a shame that most people don't have that perception.
Well, I think humans are generally good too. The real question is, if we are dealing with something off planet or someone off planet, are they good? And
right.
The ancient stories are pretty clear. It wasn't all jonquils and daisies with that group of people.
Yeah, and it's really a shame. It's just like, I think there's this huge. That's one of the biggest propaganda campaigns ever, is to convince the world and all its people that humans suck and we're violent animals and all that, and I just don't believe it.
Well,
I think we're conditioned to be that way.
Well, the Tower of Babel story, to me, is a very profound mythology, because what all the different versions of them, biblical and otherwise, state is that at a certain period in human prehistory, humanity was basically more or less socially and culturally united, not to mention linguistically, and the result of the divisions of humanity has been incessant strife and a slowing of human progress, and it's a pretty powerful story, and it's an interesting approach too, because all the stories suggest that the solution to the human threat, by whomever, gods or God, as undertook it, was basically a guerrilla warfare, covert operations sort of approach to things. They're building this big, huge tower, and we better not let the monkeys finish that. So let's go down there and stir up some trouble between all of them. In about a quarter of an inch in length and about 3/16 of an inch wide, strobing real fast, kind of a wedge shape, arrow shaped thing, strobing back and forth, and it zipped across the sky behind Crow's Peak, and I walked a few more paces, and I suddenly thought, oh my word, I've just seen a UFO, because it was clearly not a meteor with the strobing effect.
Right.
And I stood still for a few minutes just to see if perchance I heard, any helicopter noises. Ellsworth Air Force Base isn't too far away, and oftentimes there's military helicopters that have those strobing lights. Didn't hear any helicopter sound. I was listening for jets. It made absolutely no sound. And given kind of the layout, it was just, to my mind, going far too fast for any conventional jet aircraft, not to mention a helicopter. So it was something, it was clearly a technology of some sort. But again, what I couldn't possibly say.
Interesting.
Well, that's awesome. Were you a little creeped out when you saw it?
No, not at all. Not at all. I was more creeped out by the fact that it took a few seconds to register that I had seen this thing. I was more creeped out by that, and when I just kind of stood there looking and listening for sounds, the thing that first occurred to me, well, that's advanced technology of some sort. But again, and my inclination would be to guess first that it was some sort of human advanced technology rather than anybody else's. While it was moving fast, again, it would not have been fast enough for any sort of interstellar travel or interplanetary travel. But it was definitely something.
I've seen quite a few strange-looking objects myself.
Me too.
Yep. Yeah, and it is rather arresting when you see something like that. That was really my first and only UFO sighting in a conventional sense.
It was actually the main reason why I got into video editing, because I wanted to recreate it.
Which, if you look at the, so to speak, their family tree, they're all ultimately related to each other. So my model has always been World War I. You've got the Kaiser as the grandson of Queen Victoria, the cousin of Tsar Nicholas II, related through other relations to Victor Emmanuel in Italy and Kaiser Franz Joseph in Austria. All of these royal families were intermarried over the decades for so long that, it was one big family fight.
Right.
And at the end of World War I, something very peculiar happens. You had the Allies inventorying German technology, and in the Treaty of Versailles stipulating, well, we don't want you building any more great big huge siege guns, no more heavy artillery, please no more airplanes, and keep your army really small. to make sure you're going to do this.
Right.
We want you to demilitarize the Rhineland. You can't station any troops west of the Rhine River, and we're extending that quarantine zone 30 miles on the east bank of the Rhine River. So if you look at the ancient texts, they suggest a very similar thing, that some sort of quarantine zone exists around planet Earth. In the Book of Enoch, it's I believe it's at the orbit of the moon.
Yep.
In Henry Cornelius Agrippa, it's at the outermost orbit of the outermost planet, which back then would have been Neptune. So in other words, there's this idea that there's a quarantine zone around the Earth, but those texts don't tell you why. Well, if you connect the idea to this ancient cosmic war, what you have is an interplanetary Treaty of Versailles. We're going to keep these little monkeys cordoned off down here on this little planet, and step over this line, and you're in trouble. So I think there's some sort of ongoing effect of that war, and here's why. If you use my World War I analogy again, the Allies, the French in particular, had their military attachés during the interwar period, constantly scouring Germany, inspecting their industrial plants and so on to make good and sure, that the Germans weren't building any more big artillery. And in other words, they performed an intelligence mission.
Because I thought that'd be cool.
Yeah, I went home and to this day I could kick myself that I didn't write down the date and time more accurately. All I did was I sketched it real fast in one of my notebooks, and in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations, I reproduced the little sketch I drew of this weird-looking little thing, whatever it was.
Okay. So another topic that let's see. My aunt, who's awesome, she might be listening to right now. She brought up to me, I think it was in 1996. She told me that in 1997 there would be. She described it as wars in the heaven between different alien races, and they would be fighting for Earth. And I have to ask, is that what you were referring to when you say cosmic wars?
No, the book Cosmic War is about an ancient cosmic war that I think was fought circa 3.2 million years ago for reasons that I get into in the book. Largely because that appears to be the most recent date that comes the closest in terms of astrophysical and geological evidence to the textual dates that are indicated by, the Manetho texts in Egypt or the Edfu texts or the Sumerian Kings List. And I grant that that's still a huge whopping chronological discrepancy. I don't really attempt to resolve the chronological issue. I'm simply trying to look at the conceptual associations between the texts and what may have gone on. But that said, my approach to that war then, it's still my approach today, is that if you look at what the texts describe, it is describing an interplanetary conflict that's fought with some horribly destructive weapons, both biological and environmental and press a button and blow up a planet sort of thing. And the thing that occurs in the text is that these wars are being fought by the gods.
We are joined by our guest, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, and we are about to get into the subject of cosmic wars. Before we, this would have to do with it, sort of. I'm kind of wondering about this. Richard Hoagland, I've heard him talk about it on Coast to Coast before. He says you can take a pair of night vision goggles and look up to the sky, and you can actually see, like spacecraft or whatever flying around at night. I'm curious if you've ever tried that, or if you think there's any truth to that.
Well, I haven't tried it. I can't afford night vision goggles.
Same here.
One doesn't get rich in this business, as you probably know. Right. I know several people that have done that and have seen some rather astonishing things. So I don't doubt that people are seeing all sorts of stuff going on up there. I've seen some intriguing videos from some of this stuff. So no, I don't have any problem with people that have looked up there and seen something. It's just I haven't.
Have you ever seen UFOs? I have.
Yes.
Okay. Just that I wanted to make you more comfortable. Yeah.
My first answer is always when people ask me, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" And my answer is yes. Every time there's a full moon, and I'm not joking. The moon, if you stop and consider the physics of what it's doing, is doing a rather astonishing thing. If it was captured, as some scientists believe it was, then its orbit, if it enters the gravity well of the Earth, then it's going to speed up as it gets closer to Earth. And then as it flies by, it's going to start to slow down. So the orbit of an object captured like that should be much more elliptical than it is. So in other words, if it was a captured object with a circular orbit, a nearly circular orbit around the Earth, which in addition to that, it revolves on its own axis, but revolves in such a period that we never see more than 60% of the surface of the moon, and it's always the same surface. So, figuring out the orbital mechanics of all of that simply by capture, that's piling up a lot of coincidences. So in other words, the real bottom line is that for the moon, if it's a captured object to be in that kind of orbit, then someone slowed it down and parked it there.
Right, I've heard this before.
I'm not the first to say this. Isaac Newton, his complaint was that the moon is the only thing that gave him a headache. Isaac Asimov pointed out Russian scientists back in the Soviet era in the 1960s just came right out and hypothesized in some of their scientific magazines that it was a big artificial object, or at least had been steered there. So that's my first answer. But yes, I've also seen a more conventional UFO thing a couple of years ago.
Okay. So, think there's any link to these beings as far as giants goes?
I don't know. I really don't know. What I saw, I'm kind of hard-headed about this. With one or two exceptions, I can't think of any UFO case that absolutely compels me to conclude that it must necessarily be an extraterrestrial technology. What I saw was certainly interesting. It was certainly technologically sophisticated, but the signature I saw was not a signature sufficient to suggest to me that this thing is coming here from Alpha Centauri.
Right.
In other words, at best, all I can say is that's an advanced technology. Whose it is, I don't know. It could be human, could be somebody else's. I simply don't know.
I agree. Same boat there. Yeah.
Can you go into what you saw?
I did in a book called Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations.
Okay.
Basically, I was walking late at night. I'm a night owl, guys. So I was, I'm usually up until 5 or 6 in the morning, and I was living in Spearfish, South Dakota at the time, which is right on the northern tip of the Black Hills, kind of about 15 miles from the Wyoming border. And to the west of Spearfish, there's this big, tall, 6,000 feet tall mountain on the South Dakota side called Crow's Peak. And about 2:30 in the morning, I walked down to our little local 24-hour convenience store to get a Coke and walk down there. And on my way back, I'm kind of walking up the hill, and I see the silhouette of the mountains off in the distance, real dark. And then I saw this strobing thing that would have been, from where I stood, would have